In your view, Dr. Sachs, what role should emerging powers like the BRICS nations, and I know that's a touchy topic with Trump, but what role could they possibly play in countering, what you term US hegemonic power grabs? Is there a role that they should be playing at all?
Yes, crucial. The BRICS represent the vast majority of the world population.
Yeah.
The emerging economies are about 85% of the world population. They actually want quiet. They don't want an American would-be hegemon running around making wars, grabbing territory, stoking big crises. And just to quickly say, the most dangerous war on the horizon is Iran, where it really seems very realistic that Israel will attack and the U.S. will always support Israel, and that could be a complete global disaster. Iran is a BRICS nation, by the way.
Yeah.
So I think the BRICS is extremely important to say we do not accept this kind of approach to the world. We want multilateralism. We want international law. This is actually crucial anyway for economic development and for our survival. And the BRICS are the responsible nations in the system right now. And so I always say to my friends, both in China and India, the two giants need, especially now, to get along with each other because the real problem is the instability coming from the United States. And I've said in India for many years, don't join an anti-China approach, the Quad and so forth. The U.S. is so unstable right now that don't play that game. Rather, join together with China, with Russia, with Brazil, South Africa, the other BRICS countries to say, we will provide a basis of stability and, by the way, economic growth, because the BRICS are the fast-growing part of the world economy, and we will be a ballast, even as the U.S., sad to say, becomes rather unstable.
And we actually did see a bit of that last year, Dr. Sachs, as you well know, but the turbulence caused by Trump's tariff threats did create a situation where India and China in some ways called a bit of a diplomatic ceasefire and actually improved relations with each other.
And I would say, if I might, that the events taking place right now should have the same message to the leadership of India and China. Stay closer, keep calm together, and resist the instability coming from the U.S. right now, because this actually is a problem for everybody.
I'd like to push you just a little bit further on that point, Dr. Sachs. India, prominent member of the BRICS, you talked about the China dynamic as well. But India is also currently embroiled in a fairly turbulent trade and tariff battle with the United States. There are many different layers of unpleasantness, if I may use that word, in the relationship, whether it is the ceasefire and Operation Sindoor or other things that are happening. How should India, view this entire regime change impulse that has now begun under Trump 2.0?
I said last year to Indian friends, don't expect that inside deal with the United States on trade. Don't expect that India is going to replace China in the U.S. value chains. The U.S. is too protectionist and too unstable for such an approach actually to be successful. I'm sorry to say that I was shown to be right when Trump did something even stupider than I would have imagined, putting on the penalty 25% plus the reciprocal 25%. The whole thing was completely out of control on the U.S. side. But it proved the basic point. India is not going to develop its economy and its future through some kind of alliance with the United States. I don't think many people think that way, but if they do, I would like to suggest an alternative, which is that India's place is as a leader of the 85% of the world and the emerging and developing economies outside of the US and Europe right now. And that is the fast-growing part of the world economy, and it will be just fine if the BRICS cooperate closely, bring Africa into this, bring the Western Asian region into this. Then there's a real prospect for not only weathering the U.S. instability, but actually having a very dynamic, positive economic future and geopolitical stability, despite what the U.S. might be doing. It's just the U.S. Doesn't call the shots and shouldn't be, the bluster shouldn't make countries afraid of that.
My final question, Dr. Sachs, and this comes back to my introduction of you and the statement that you made in the United Nations Security Council has exploded everywhere. Everyone's watching your words, listening to them very carefully. You've urged the Security Council to stand up to these great power violations. Do you see any realistic path for the Security Council to take any concrete action against a permanent member like the US? Is that even possible? Is the UN even relevant anymore, given what we're seeing now?
Well, the Security Council itself certainly cannot take real action against the United States because the U.S. will literally veto that, and that's the structure of the Security Council. But the UN is relevant in an overwhelming sense that it is the one place where the world's governments speak. And it makes a difference if 170 or 180 countries say, we don't want to go this way of lawlessness and anarchy. We want the UN Charter. The UN was made because of disaster in the world, and we can't afford another such disaster. Will that make a difference? Absolutely, for two reasons. One is if the rest of the world adheres to the standards of the UN Charter, even if the United States is blustering and breaking Chinaware, I was going to say, not to be confused, but just breaking the dishes everywhere. Let me state it better. Then the rest of the world will say, well, the U.S. is having a tantrum, but it's not really affecting the whole world. Let everybody remember the U.S. is only 4% of the world population, so it can't break the world through its tantrums alone. So this is one point. But second, it's also important to understand what's happening with American foreign policy is not the policy of the American people. It's not even the policy resulting from a political process. It is a deep state and a president who has certain proclivities that don't ask anything. They don't ask the Congress. They certainly don't ask anything of the American public. And the American public is not in favor of this. So if the rest of the world says, no, this has to stop, that's actually helpful for the American people also to tell their own government, no, we are not going to go on in this unconstitutional manner. And that can make a difference too. So I think the UN remains very significant, very weak in the actual ability to stop this, but extremely important if the world stands up and says, we want law, not anarchy, and not hegemony.